5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Neugebauer, who is a member of the Science Committee and also the sponsor of this legislation.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate Chairman Smith's support for legislation, as well as Ms. Johnson, ranking member. I rise support today of H.R. 1786, the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program. This is a very important piece of legislation, because what we know is that tornadoes and tornadic-type winds have caused a huge amount of destruction and loss of life in our country. Last year alone, there was over 1,300 recorded tornadoes in our country, causing over 70 deaths and over 1,500 injuries. These storms not only cost lives, but they also damage property. And last year alone, or the average, is about $400 million a year, except in 2011 when we saw really a bad year for tornadoes, and the damage was over $28 billion. That's not just a natural disaster, that's a natural disaster as well. But back in 1970, I had an opportunity firsthand to find out exactly how devastating these tornadoes can be, because in my hometown of Lubbock, Texas, a tornado ripped through our community and killed 26 of our citizens. It was in an area, fortunately, I was not injured, but it was an area that I lived at that time. And I had an opportunity to see firsthand the tremendous amount of devastation that can happen from these storms. And very quickly after that storm in 1970, Dr. Ernst Kiesling with Texas Tech University began to study at Texas Tech these tornadic winds and began to look at ways to build structures more effectively, to build shelters, and to really study the impacts that these storms have on building materials and what materials hold up the best. Now, we've been talking about statistics, but really what's impacted is the lives of people that are impacted by these storms. And when someone loses their home, they not only rebuild their home, but in many cases they're going to have to rebuild their lives, and which is one of the primary reasons that I introduced this important piece of legislation. And what does it do? Well, basically it begins to, again, as I mentioned earlier, what was going on at Texas Tech, not only study the building materials and different types of wind activity and the materials and the structure and the construction techniques that are used to apply those materials, but also to begin to have a better ability to predict how these storms form and in the future be able to give more warning, but just doing the research overall of how we can do better at predicting and also helping the American people, do mitigation against these kinds of storms, understanding the mechanics of those storms. So basically what this NWARP does is it takes 4 agencies, it pools them together in this in how they spend money for this important research. It takes NOAA, the National Science Foundation, FEMA, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and basically make sure that they're coordinating and then also sharing that information. What is so important about doing research and using federal tax dollars to do that is make sure that we're transforming that out into the general public. And so as we learn about these techniques and we begin to make suggestions of how building codes or building standards or building techniques can be improved in the future, thereby saving lives and property down the road. That's an important part of this. And what we learn is that for about every dollar that we spend in mitigation, that we save $4 in response down the road. And so not only is this a piece of legislation that will help save lives, save property, but a really novel idea of saving the American taxpayers money at the same time. So this is a common sense piece of legislation. It's bipartisan, passed out of the committee in a bipartisan way, and it'll save lives, it'll save money, and it'll save property. And so I encourage my colleagues to support this important piece of legislation. And with that, I yield back.